All right, we're going to talk about subject-verb agreement. This applies to M1 in IXL. It also applies to M3, and then I think M2, although I didn't actually assign that one. Let me start us over on this one so we can do it together. Let's see. Oh, you know what? I'm going to do M1 because I think that's more difficult. All right. So subject-verb agreement, what the heck is it? Well, first, we got to know what a subject and a verb are. So the subject would be the main character in the sentence. The thing doing the verb, I guess, is another way to think about it. So let's take a very simple sentence. The dog barks. Right? I think most of us would agree that this just doesn't sound right. And why is that? What we're looking for here is this plural or is this singular? That's the big question. And the exact same thing should be asked of the verb. Is this plural or is this singular? And they must match. For the dogs, we would need to say the dogs bark. And I think, again, that's very intuitive. It's because we've been speaking our whole life. We haven't really thought about how we conjugate this. And what do I mean by conjugate? For a, let's see. For a noun, singular meaning there's one, plural meaning there's more than one, typically we just add an S, right? Cat, cats, desk, desks, computer, computers, and so on. There are some exceptions, you know, there are a lot of exceptions, but irregulars, foot and feet, and so on. But for the most part, the general rule is you add an S to make something plural, if it is a noun. But what's very counterintuitive is that if it's a verb, it does the exact opposite. If you're going to say the cat, you're going to use the verb to pounce, you would say pounces, right? The cat pounces. The cats pounce. The desk sits versus the desks sit. The computer works versus the computers work. You may notice the S is added to make something plural. If it's a noun, the S is added to make something singular if it's a verb. Now that doesn't apply to first person, and we won't get into that, but for the sake of these examples, third person singular nouns have verbs with S's on them. The cat pounces, the desk sits, the computer works, right? So the challenge on these problems is going to be to find the subject, to find the verb, and then make sure we have it conjugated the right way. So, beneath Puerto Princesa Subterranean River National Park in the Philippines, flow an underground river that empties into the Pacific Ocean. This one's a little bit challenging. To find the subject, let's ask ourselves, what is the thing that is doing the verb? And the main verb in here is flow. And we have empties, but flow is our primary verb. So was it Puerto Princesa Subterranean River National Park that flows? Or is it a river that flows? and it's a river. This is our subject. The river flow. Now, we can't have the dog bark. We have to add the S. For a singular, we add the S. So we need to have flows. Now, that was a little bit challenging because we're doing a little bit backwards. The sentence was a little bit out of order. Here's another example. Kind of looks right at first, but it's not. Well, it doesn't look right because lions don't live in the jungle, but grammatically it's wrong as well. So you could rewrite this sentence in this way. You could say the lions, not the ions, the lions roar in the jungle. If you add the S on there, it doesn't match, right? Lions, as in cats, roars, as in pounce. To make it plural, you have to take away that S. And the same exact thing applies here, but the computer won't catch it. Roar the lions, because the lions roar. And that's exactly what we did in that previous example. A newly uncovered Viking fortress on Zealand, Denmark's largest island, R-shaped. A fortress is the thing that is shaped. So, a fortress, singular, is. We talked about the S's. Let's talk about a few irregulars. We'll talk about singular and plural. Blah, blah. So, is versus are, for example. As in, the dog is old and the dogs are old. Okay. We have has and have. The dog has fleas. The dogs have fleas. Let's see. Does and do. The dog does his business. The dogs do their business. And so on. So there are some that we just have to, and there are no S's necessarily, although I guess does hasn't, and hasn't, and is, well, maybe it does have an S. But regardless, there are some that don't operate in the same way. Making it plural is a whole, different formation. So let's keep that in mind. So this is singular. Singular for R is. Okay, so what is the thing that is lying? A sea of water lies. Okay, so a sea is one thing. Lies as a verb needs the S to make it singular. A cat pounces, a sea lies, right? In a phenomenon known as unihemispheric sleep, one half of a dolphin's brain stay awake. Okay. When you get a fraction, let's see. Well, that's not true. When you get a fraction, a percentage, or a number, and it applies directly to a noun, you're going to use the noun to conjugate. A brain stays. Okay, 3/5 of a brain would still stays. Okay, hopefully we'll get a different type of example in a minute, and I'll show you how it can be different. But in this example, what is it that stays? A dolphin brain. A brain. Okay. A number of plant-based foods contains protein. So when we have a number of foods, we're actually asking what contains? The foods contains. So foods contain is a much better answer. A number of plant-based foods contain. If we had the number, it would be different. The number of plant-based foods is high, for example, because that would make it the subject. But in this example, we're asking the question, what contains protein? Foods contain protein. Okay, so lakes are. There are no natural lakes. It's the subject, that's the verb. The metric system. Okay, here's an example of where a number would be a singular. So 3.28 feet are the equivalent of 1 meter. This is really confusing. That's plural, right? I mean, it's not 1 foot is, it's 3 feet are. But it's actually not. This is a weird exception. Six feet is a good height. Six feet are a good height. No, 6 feet is a good height because 6 feet is a measurement. And that's a weird exception. But hopefully you see in this example that it just would sound wrong to say 6 feet are a good height. It's the height is what we're conjugating for. Okay, so 3.28 feet is the equivalent. It's the measurement. It's like saying the measurement of 3.28 feet is the equivalent. According to an online survey I read, 72% of workers in the information technology sector is satisfied. So what is satisfied? Workers is satisfied. Well, no, workers are satisfied. Even though we have a number here, percentage here, we're conjugating it based on workers. The only time you'd ever not do that is if you had 75% is a big number, right? You wouldn't say 75% are a big number because it's the big number that is. It's the number that is. So it's if the subject is the percentage itself, then you use is. But in that example, you wouldn't, because you're conjugating it for people now. The people is now the subject. The word people is now the subject, okay? All right. And there's a great example. 50% of residential water is used. Okay. Summer breaks from school. We'll stop there just so I can recap. So to recap, there's a subject, there's a verb. We got to find the subject, the thing that's acting on the verb. We got to find the verb. We got to make sure they match, because if they don't match, we get sentences that sound like this, and that's no good. And even if they're complex sentences or bigger sentences, we still have to do our due diligence and make sure they match. Even if they're sentences where they're kind of inverted like that. Even if they're sentences with irregular verbs, we have to do that. And this is a pretty difficult skill. This is honestly one of the top 2 to 3 mistakes I see as an English teacher. This one's rough. So you're not alone in the struggle with this. If you need extra help, please email me and I'd be happy to help you out. And I will look forward to seeing you in class. Thanks.